All right, looks like we are live and we've got a solid audience already. Guys, thanks for being here. I appreciate the kind words from Godzilla Freak says these new intros are next level. I appreciate it, brother. We are incredibly excited about them. So we are going to utilize them any chance we get. And we've already got the super stickers coming in. And thank you so much. Let me go through these. Raymond, the super sticker master. I appreciate it. Raymond, the creation corpse is dedicated to you. You gave us the idea and I love it. So anyways, you guys came here to see us debunk. This is going to be an incredibly easy refutation of stated clearly. So Raw, Matt, and myself, we've watched the video and we are excited because anytime somebody tries to put out a video about the evidence for universal common ancestry and they look to endogenous retroviruses, Matt, you know we are addicted to debunking ERVs. I think it was about a year ago, Matt, we did a video on Kent Hovind's channel. We went on his channel, called him over the phone, and we absolutely demolished Pelagia on ERVs. And that video, I think, has like 16,000 views. So we know we know Pelagia saw the video, and he has run. He has dodged, and he hasn't been able to refute it. So those videos are out there for people to see. And stated clearly, just put out a video recently claiming that endogenous retroviruses demonstrate that banana plants and humans are related through common ancestry. So, Matt, man, are you excited, brother? And also, how you been? What's going on? I love the shirt, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, everything's going good, man. I've just been working for everybody, making the new videos for the Patreon subscribers and going to town on evidence that dinosaurs lived recently. And it's a lot of work because, you know, I'm doing the new 3D animation stuff. So that's taking up most of the time. But I'm always willing to jump over to a different topic, especially for these absolutely ridiculous arguments that the critics have. So we're going to kill it tonight.
Yes. Yeah, I'm pumped. And actually, I should point that out for our Patreon guys. Our first, okay, there we go. Our the second video that you made, Matt, on dinosaurs and man, young Earth creation, is done, and I think we're going to release that probably first thing tomorrow for our patrons. So I want to thank all of our amazing patrons. All our amazing supporters, guys. You are the life and blood of this channel, and you are the reason why we are able to do this full time and take on all the critics. The critics hate us. We know that, and we love it. We thrive on it. So check out our Patreon for all these exclusive videos. Like I said, the new one will be up sometime tomorrow. So also reminder, this week, we got a big week. Wednesday, Raw, Matt, and myself. I should say Matt, man. I keep screwing that up, Matt. We're going to be interviewing Dr. Dan Biddle from Genesis Apologetics. And we're going to be interviewing him specifically on human evolution because Genesis Apologetics put out a video debunking human evolution, going over all the so-called best transitional forms. And it is going to be a blast. He's going to give a brief presentation at first. Then we're going to do a Q&A, some questions from Matt, man, and myself, questions from the audience. So we've got a few days, guys. Think up some good questions pertaining to human evolution, and we are going to demolish Human Evolution Wednesday. Then on Saturdays, the big debate between Joseph Hubbard and Snake Was Right on young Earth creation and Noah's flood. So that's going to be a lot of fun. On the Friday, I am going to be on the Creation Conversation channel with John McKay and Joseph Hubbard, and we are going to promote the debate and talk about a variety of young Earth creation topics. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So in other words, lots to look forward to. April has been jam-packed with content, And May is going to be the same. It's been a great year so far. That's all that comes to mind, Matt, unless you have any other reminders or updates or anything. We can probably get right into it. What do you think, Matt?
No, nothing comes to my mind right now. I'm sure I've forgotten something, but that's just the way it goes. And I usually, when we do a debunking like this, I like to have something for the people, the critics in general. And they can usually go to creationclothing.com and see some articles that we write up. Since I was really just told about this today, not really much time to throw that together. So you'll have to just ask if you really want the sources for what we're going to be talking about. We always throw them up during the critique anyway. We like to pull up the studies and just show what we're talking about. But if there's one in particular you're looking for, you just go to that channel, and I'm sure I'll make up something for ERVs later.
Awesome. Yeah, guys, a lot of, oh, Matt, I think I'm hearing a bit of an echo. Let me just see if it's, okay, should be good. Yeah, definitely Godzilla Freak points out the second channel has almost 8,000 subscribers. So between the two channels, we're looking at, almost 12,000 subscribers. And definitely check out the website for articles as well as all of our books. Check out the Goodreads page. We got a ton of reviews, a lot of good feedback there on all of the books that we've put out. So anyways, why don't we get right into it? This isn't going to be the first time we have debunked endogenous retroviruses, but it has been utilized a lot lately, and I'll tell you why. Matt, is my audio coming in okay? You can hear me okay? Okay.
Yep, I hear you good.
It all started with Conspiracy Cats, who it must have been about a year and a half ago. He utilized endogenous retroviruses, and all your evolutionists started, using it as well as some type of irrefutable evidence for universal common ancestry. So I actually called out Conspiracy Cats and said, let's debate it. And all the lines of evidence that we are going to be utilizing today and the arguments we're going to be putting forth and the challenges to the critics, I also put forth to Conspiracy Cats over a year and a half ago, and there were no responses. Check out that debate. He was actually one of the evolutionists that was man enough to actually accept the debate challenge, okay? Because during this series, another evolutionist bites the dust when it comes to Vice, Rhino, Professor Dave. We have refuted a number of them. The challenge has also been out for them to debate the topic as well, and none of them have taken up the challenge. Okay, so what you're going to see here is, before we get into the video, I can demolish it in just a few sentences, okay? Because like all the critics and all the proponents of universal ancestry stated clearly, is clearly not up to date on the science, and you're going to see that for yourself. It's like he doesn't even read creationist technical literature. You're going to notice that throughout this video. It's precisely why these guys are so easy to refute and also so easy to expose in debates. It's a lot of fun. So stated clearly's entire video completely misunderstands the point of dispute when it comes to the creation model, the evolution model, okay? What he is arguing is, once again, like arguing for universal ancestry by pointing to the blueness of the sky. We know that both models, the independent origins model and the universal common ancestry model, can explain the blueness of the sky. This is a line of evidence that's agnostic to the debate. And I always point out that we need to look to that which can differentiate the models. When it comes to endogenous retroviral-like sequences, the question is not whether ERV-like sequences can form viruses or if they have the hallmark characteristics of viruses, because we know that there's a creationist hypothesis. It's called the variation inducing genetic element hypothesis. And this explains the origin of viruses as being post-fall, in that they arose from ERV-like sequences within our genomes. Okay, so for example, instead of coming into our genome from the outside, they may have originated from within the genomes of living organisms. And this hypothesis makes testable predictions, which we are going to discuss today. But it looks as if, stated clearly, who's been attacking young Earth creation for a long time has never even heard of this creationist hypothesis for endogenous retroviruses and other viral-like sequences. The more important question is, when you guys are watching his video and we're going through this, ask yourself this: are ERV-like sequences functional units of DNA? In other words, are these viral-like sequences like ERVs really the ancient remnants of viral infections, or are they created units of DNA function? And function, as you're going to see, is actually key to answering this question. We're going to find out throughout this video why ERVs and genetics in general points to the biblical model of ancestry and refutes. At the same time, it's a double whammy. It also refutes universal ancestry. Evolutionists have egg on their face again, and this is going to be a lot of fun. So I just wanted to point that out, that these critics are not addressing the key issue. They're pointing to agnostic lines of evidence concerning the debate, and they're not answering the key issue. So, Matt, if you had any comments on that, of course, brother, and then we can get into it.
No, it's a typical scenario that we've realized that the people that are the most vocal about anti-creation are the ones that usually know the least about it, which I find pretty ironic. Imagine somebody comes over and they're yelling at you about, I don't know, pick a subject, say your car. I can't believe you bought that car. That thing's ridiculous. I mean, Toyota's never made a good vehicle since they've ever started. And you go, oh, really? Tell me about the company. Well, I don't know anything about them. Have you ever owned a Toyota? Nope. Well, what kind of engines do Toyotas have? I don't know. It's like, what are you talking about? Your opinion is useless. It's garbage to me. So that's them. These are the opponents that we have. They are worthless. Let's expose them.
That's why I'll say this, Matt. If stated clearly, when he watches this video and he thinks to himself, and we know he will, when he thinks VIGE hypothesis, variation inducing genetic elements, what does SFT mean by that? Okay, I want him to know that this is a prime example and reason why your critics are losing so bad. They're losing the war, they're losing the debate so bad because they're not recognizing these young Earth creation hypotheses. They can't even name one testable prediction coming out of the creation side, okay? So when he realizes that he's never even heard of that hypothesis, he should think to himself, okay, maybe I should go read creationist technical literature and see what they're saying about, for example, ERVs. And that way I can make a video that actually addresses the key issue and doesn't misrepresent the creationist side, doesn't put forth straw man arguments. So, yeah. Anyways, why don't we get right into it then, Matt? I just want to lay down the foundation for tonight, because those questions that I just put forth, are ERVs, are they the ancient remnants of viral infections, or are they created units of DNA function? Remember that, guys. Keep those questions at the back of your head as this video is going on, and see if stated clearly is addressing the key issue at all throughout this video. Go ahead, brother.
All right. I'm going to turn up the volume, make sure. Yep, it's 100%. So this is as good as you're going to get it, everyone. Share. I'm sorry, hold on.
Oh, Matt, I don't think you clicked audio.
Thanks.
You would have to no problem. And guys in the chat, we are your eyes and ears. So let us know if the audio, the video is coming in good. That way we can ensure this is a smooth stream. So I'm also using a new camera that I got today. So let me know if there's any issues there, any audio, video issues throughout. And thanks so much for the super stickers that are still coming in. Let's get this party started.
Stated Clearly presents Evidence for Evolution in Your Own DNA, Endogenous Retroviruses. You've probably heard that great apes like chimpanzees are humankind's closest living relatives. Even before evolution was discovered, scientists studying comparative anatomy already grouped humans into the ape family alongside chimpanzees. In those pre-evolution years, however, the word family was often used figuratively. Many scientists held a fixed species view. They thought humans and chimpanzees had been similar yet different since the dawn of time. This changed by the end of the 1800s. Along with the discovery of the process of evolution, the study of fossils convinced the majority of scientists that humans and chimps do share a common ancestor. We really are family. Today, hundreds of transitional fossils have been found, representing over 20 distinct groups which blur the line between humans and chimpanzees. That said, some people feel that the study of fossils is too subjective.
All right. There's a whole lot to be...
Matt.
Yeah.
We could go for 2 hours on just what was said there. I have to say, we are going to touch on it briefly, but please, I want to recommend our latest debunking of Sci-Man Dan, where we go into incredible detail on everything that he just talked about, especially on the out of Africa scenario, the fossils, human evolution. So I recommend checking that out for an even more detailed rebuttal. But we'll touch on it briefly. Matt, you can start, brother.
When he first started out, he said, when evolution was recently discovered, it wasn't discovered, it was assumed. First of all, it's an assumption. It's the storyboard you guys have gone with after Darwin, and Darwin liked the idea that he was paid for by his cousin, a Rockefeller, to come up with an unfalsifiable theory, so he invented natural selection. And then what happened is he was like, well, no one's really agreeing with me except for this other anti-theist named Charles Lyell. That's why he grabbed his book, The Principles of Geology, where he made up the fossil record. And it's still being employed today, even though it was obviously created for the intent and the biased thing that he himself said was to get rid of Moses from the sciences. So he, wanting to invoke deep time, invented something, even though he was a lawyer and not an actual geologist. He created the myth. And ever since, that's what we've been going with. So it's not discovered. It was what they believed was the evidence that they were looking at, and they built the theory around it. They looked at what they could find and they said, let's go with this. Everything we're going to find has to prove that this is true. And that's where they wield their story.
Amen. Stop.
What?
No, I just heard some echo there real quick. Matt, if you wanted to stop sharing screen for a second, I'm going to share screen as well. Okay, let me see. I think because you're on your laptop, maybe if I'm not talking for a while and then you talk, I just hear a bit of an echo back, but it sounds good now. So let me share screen real quick. And okay, great. And I think it's hilarious what he's saying, because once again, he's showing that he's not up to date on the human evolution side of things either. Now, for one, in a nutshell, to break it down quickly, when it comes to the fossil record, all you find is either fully human, degenerated humans, fully ape, degenerated apes. You don't find any of these so-called transitionals. You do find artificial species, because you've got these bone beds that consist of multiple different species, okay? And this is a real thing. I've got a lecture from Lee Berger who's pointed out that Australopithecus afarensis may even be a chimeric species, a mixture of multiple different species because of these bones that are being intermingled, okay? So this is a real thing. This isn't something Cretaceous made up. Now, that being said, they could look to Australopithecus sediba, they can look to Homo habilis, but he's clearly not up to date because there have been numerous papers that have come out even as early as 2019, not too long ago. For example, here, Australopithecus sediba, not likely human's ancestor. The fossil record for the ancient hominin Australopithecus sediba is younger than that of Homo, a highly unlikely scenario for a direct lineage. So, I mean, these so-called transitionals come about, they're praised as amazing evidence for human evolution, and then they're overturned. There's contradictions later on. So the key is, whenever there's a big flashy headline saying this evidence right here is, you know, the best evidence yet for human evolution, wait a couple of years, you'll see it being overturned. Right here, temporal evidence shows Australopithecus sediba is unlikely to be the ancestor of Homo. Right here, new study shakes up human family tree. So what we're seeing now is a bushy mess. Human evolution is not this straightforward linear path like they used to once think. It is a bushy mess. Right here, there's significant overlap in groundbreaking find. 3 kinds of early humans on Earth living together in South Africa. Australopithecus, Paranthropus, the earliest known Homo erectus. This is all exactly what we would predict as biblical creationists. Significant overlap. Even your fossilized footprints, right, Matt? Laetoli footprint, human, chimp. I mean, we've gone into this in incredible detail, where they find human-like footprints, human-like artifacts, human-like bones and fossils. But it's circular reasoning on the evolution side, because they'll say, no, humans did not exist this far back. So it's human-like. And we've dealt with that over and over again. Even Donald Johanson himself says that the collection suggests that Homo and Australopithecus coexisted as early as 3 million years ago. So point is, there's significant overlap. It's a mess. There are findings here when it comes to sediba. Human missing link fossils may be jumble of species. Right here. Ella Bin concluded that the spines belong to 2 different species. And we discussed last time as to how the genetic related evidence combined with the fossil related evidence is not consistent with a satisfied conclusion as to the origin of humans. You know, whether it was in Africa, the Middle East, even the secular evolutionists are agreeing with this. So no. The fossil record doesn't work for the evolutionists. Genetics does not work for the evolutionists, right, Matt, as you know. And he's right. When it comes to the fossil record, it's low quality science, low confidence science. And looking at fossils or bones found in the dirt that don't have any genetics associated with them, the conclusions can oftentimes be deceiving. That's why it's difficult to look at a bone found in the dirt and conclude homology or conclude convergent evolution, because we know today within the same species there oftentimes exists more variation than across or between species. So fossils can be deceiving. It's low quality. The most direct way to determine ancestry is through genetics. And Matt, before we move on, if you want to touch on just for a minute how genetics has confirmed the first couple, Adam and Eve. It's confirmed the Tower of Babel. It's confirmed Noah. We've got mitochondrial DNA. We've got the Y chromosome. Y chromosomes have incredibly low variation. Go back to one Y chromosomal ancestor. Just 4,500 years worth of mutation accumulation in the Y chromosome. Same thing goes for the mitochondrial DNA. So genetics fails and the fossil record fails. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, that's what's funny. That's another example of them, how they're not up to date on their research, right? Like we've mapped Eve's sequence and you can trace back, going back in time until the genome is good from a perfect starting point. You can track mutations back until a point of time when there are no mutations. And what do you find? That wasn't very long ago. So the genetics is kind of where the everything ends. And that's why they have endless storytelling in the fossil record, because you can dig up anything and you can tell a story because it doesn't have the genetic evidence that they need to confirm anything. So they get this they just go right to something and then they storytell. Remember, for example, Sahelanthropus sagensis, that was the root ancestor that branched off and created all the humans that we have today, right? From Neanderthal to Denisovan to modern humans. Well, guess what? That was overturned as just being a gorilla. So their root of the whole story that they invented is gone from the knee joint that they found. Remember? Now it's just a normal gorilla. It was a female gorilla this entire time. And they were saying, no, it was the perfect transition from a primitive root ancestor into the Homo sapiens that we have, because it was bipedal and, you know, they had all the story going, and then boom, it's a gorilla. Just absolutely hilarious that, like you said, they came out and this is definitive proof. You know, supposedly this thing lived for over 1 million years as a huge population, and they never found any except for just a skull of one, not even the whole body. And so they story tell endlessly. Come on, oh yeah, this happened. Here's his family. Here's where it like made backpacks or whatever. And then boom, all of a sudden, oh, it's just a female gorilla. But it doesn't matter. It still proves evolution. Ridiculous.
Yeah. So I find it funny that he is pointing out the subjective nature of the fossil record to begin with, but he thinks genetics is going to save the story of universal common ancestry, when in fact it's quite the opposite. Everything we know, everything we see in terms of genetics actually confirms independent origins and at the same time refutes universal common ancestry. You know, I'm not going to expect someone like Stated Clearly to be able to make testable predictions on mutation rates in the mitochondrial DNA, mutation rates in the Y chromosome. We know Dr. Nathaniel Jensen has confirmed successful predictions in terms of the history of civilization as being detected in the Y chromosome. These papers have been released. The evolutionary community is silent. The evolutionists are cornered and they got nowhere to go. And that's why this is so fun. I mean, that's all I got to say on that. Like I said, we could go 2 hours. I recommend going and check out our Simon Dan video, and maybe we should move on.
Yeah, good point. Good point. This is about ERVs, but this was just such a ridiculous start. We had to say something. I mean, come on.
Right, right.
All right, here we go. Share my screen. Is he going to ask me that every time? Man.
Is there an independent line of evidence we can use to double check what we think we know from the study of fossils and anatomy? Dr. Francis Collins, the man who directed the Human Genome Project, rightfully pointed out that the study of DNA gives us an entirely independent, quantifiable way to test our ideas about evolution. Instead of simply taking his word for it, here we will examine the evidence for ourselves. It's widely known that DNA is great at revealing family relationships. In the court of law, DNA evidence is the gold standard for determining who the father is. DNA evidence is now widely used in the study of genealogy to figure out more distant family relationships. And there are many independent ways that DNA evidence can be used to reveal family relationships even between different species. Here,
Pause that, Matt.
Yep.
So it's hilarious because he points to Francis Collins. A lot of these guys, they point to Francis Collins. When we debated Jordan from Reason to Doubt podcast, he didn't have any answers to because we debated him on Genesis, right? Is the scientific data consistent with the historical account as described in Genesis? And his only response was, well, I read The Language of God by Francis Collins, and we systematically debunked all of the arguments that Francis Collins uses in that book. And you can see some of them reflected here, because when I watched this video, Matt, what I did was I paused it and I took a look at what Stated Clearly is flashing on the screen. And it is a number of lines of evidence that Francis Collins himself uses. For example, Francis Collins says that humans and chimpanzees share genetic mistakes, right? Pseudogenes. They'll say that humans and chimps have these genetic mistakes in the same spots within the genome. Therefore, they would have inherited that from a past common ancestor. But it shows that Francis Collins and Stated Clearly are not up to date on the science, since we now know that pseudogenes are functional and they are essential to healthy life processes in the cell. So that's been overturned. The so-called human chromosome fusion, the human chromosome 2, you can see that in there. I believe it's the top, it's there, that green one. But yet we know that where they purport this fusion supposedly took place actually represents a functional DNA element inside a human gene. So I'm sorry, stated clearly, you're not going to get a highly functional and essential gene by slamming together two chromosomes. So that's been overturned. The so-called human to chimpanzee genetic identity, as well as the gene order along chromosomes that they say shares, that shared gene order demonstrates universal common ancestry. This has actually been all overturned. Even gene order represents functionality, and the genetic identity in humans to chimpanzees we know is roughly 88%, which we'll get into a little bit later because he does touch on that. So the point is, all these lines of evidence from Francis Collins and Biologos have been completely overturned. Anybody who is using those lines of evidence are clearly not up to date on the science, because those lines of evidence have been absolutely demolished. So I just wanted to point that out, brother.
One line of DNA evidence, endogenous retrovirus DNA shared across species. In this case, between humans and chimpanzees. To understand why retrovirus DNA is such a big deal, let's first take a quick look at what retroviruses are. A retrovirus is a special type of virus that reproduces by inserting its genes directly into a cell's DNA. The virus genes become a seamless, permanent part of the host cell's genome. The cell treats the virus DNA as if it were its own. It reads the virus genes, using them to make new viruses, and when the cell copies its own DNA before reproducing, it also copies the virus DNA and passes it on as well. In mammals, modern retroviruses usually infect white blood cells. If, however, a retrovirus happens to infect a sperm cell or egg cell, and if that sperm or egg cell ends up participating in fertilization, the resulting child will have a copy of virus DNA in every single one of her cells. She'll even pass it on to her kids if she has children. Now, you might think that this is a guaranteed death sentence for the child, but the immune system can sometimes handle the problem. Normal copying errors in virus DNA can also shut a virus down. In these cases, a retrovirus insertion can be thought of as a single, giant mutation for the host. As is the case with all mutations, a retrovirus insertion might have a negative effect on the individual that contains it. It might be neutral, or, with a bit of luck, it could end up being beneficial. Virus genes also act as extra genetic material that evolution can, quote, play with as generations pass on. Future mutations can give virus genes new functions, some of which might happen to be useful. Recent studies have found that, in at least one case, it seems that an ancient mammal was infected with a virus that ended up aiding the animal in reproduction. Many of that early mammal's descendants, humans included, eventually became fully dependent on the virus gene. We can no longer reproduce without it. We are part virus. When a retrovirus becomes a permanent part of a species' DNA, whether or not it's functional, scientists call it an endogenous retrovirus. Endogenous because it is inside us from birth. It turns out that the human genome contains thousands of endogenous retrovirus segments, long stretches of DNA with sequences that match those of retroviruses. Luckily for us, none of ours can still make full-fledged viruses. They have simply mutated too much to perform their original virus-y functions. Okay, so if all of this is news to you, it's
All right, I had to stop it.
Yes.
That was just a whole lot there to deal with. Where do you want to start? Okay, so first he goes, what was it? He showed the little things, and then he said, yes, they accumulate deleterious mutations, but sometimes viruses can be beneficial. What? He must mean over time, after they've been deactivated, they can become functional. That's what they believe anyway. No one's ever seen somebody bombarded by a virus or a viral load and been like, oh, awesome, I got a tan. You know, it's great. It's going to help me in the sun. What he's talking about is nonsense, because it's not anything that they've actually observed. Nobody's ever seen anybody hit with a virus where something beneficial happened. He's invoking storytelling, something of the past where a virus became became dead and useless, and then they go, well, then there's enough of them. They compiled through time, and then something beneficial became of it. But this again goes back to nonsense storytelling. So before I go on my rant, I'll let you go.
Yeah, I find it funny that he just says I think when I talk, I might just have to mute you, Matt, but just make sure that you unmute. I think it's because you're on the laptop, because I've never had that echo before, which is fine. So I just find it funny that when it comes to the function, he just kind of throws that out there, that oftentimes what you might get from a viral infection is function, something beneficial, but yet they cannot show you a paper. They cannot present to you a paper that shows a non-functional endogenous retrovirus going from non-functional to functional. Okay, and what we're finding, actually, I'm just going to share screen, Matt, on some of these functions that we're actually finding. Okay. Here we go. So remember, to the audience, remember at the beginning, the question was, are these really the ancient remnants of viral infections? Or are they created units of DNA function? So we, as creationists from the variation-inducing genetic element hypothesis, we would predict that these viral-like sequences should be essential, should be beneficial, should be functional. And that's exactly what we're finding. For example, papers here, scientists identify new beneficial function of endogenous retroviruses in immune response. Endogenous retroviruses function as gene expression regulatory elements during mammalian pre-implantation embryo development. He just bypasses this, doesn't present a paper where this has actually been observed in real time. And it's not like it's just one or two of these that are highly functional. We've got regulatory activities of transposable elements from conflicts to benefits. Far from being junk DNA, the pervasive retrotransposons that populate the genome have a powerful capacity to influence genes and chromatin. A new study demonstrates how the transcription of one such element, HERVH, can modify the higher order 3D structure of chromatin during early primate development. Show me, evolutionists, a paper where you've got a non-functional endogenous retroviruses that co-ops these types of highly essential functional roles in living organisms. They can't present it to you. I've asked conspiracy cats, I've asked biologists in debates. They don't have this, they don't have an answer to this question. And co-option is nothing more than storytelling. Co-option is not an answer. Co-option is not empirical. We've got paper after paper. I mean, I can go on all day, retroviral promoters in the human genome. So this is exactly what we would expect if these viral-like sequences originated from within. RNA viruses need a host. So therefore, it makes more sense that the viral-like sequences would have originated within the host. And viruses in general, Matt, we touch on over and over again. I wanted to go through a couple slides here where, okay, right here. So endogenous retroviruses. Accordingly, retroviruses could have originated from within the host genome instead of invading it from outside. And this is not post hoc, ad hoc. We're not making things up, because I just spent over 5 minutes, right, Matt? This might seem redundant, but going over paper after paper after paper after paper, showing how essential these retroviruses are, these endogenous retroviruses. So it doesn't matter. You can point to the characteristics of a virus all day. We're not denying that these are viral-like sequences. The question is, how did they originate? How did they come about? The evolutionists have no answer to this. They had to have originated within, and then they can jump around the genome. Okay, so I want to continue this. This had to have been the case. This is why the existence of endogenous retroviruses and viral-like sequences are better explained in the biblical-based model of ancestry, because it had to be the case in any scenario, since viruses are dependent upon host cells. Remember I said that a couple minutes ago? Viruses are dependent upon host cells. This means the cell's genome had to predate viruses. Let me read that again. That's incredibly important. This means that the cell's genome had to predate viruses. So the evidence suggests, remember those two questions at the beginning? Are these really the ancient remnants of viral infections, like the evolutionists want us to believe? And their way of arguing for this is by pointing to, like Barry Despero, who we destroyed, pointing to the hallmark characteristics of what a virus looks like, gag and pull genes, for example. No, that doesn't matter. We're not denying the characteristics of these viral-like sequences. Okay, we expect that in a variation-inducing genetic element. We expect those characteristics. That's agnostic to the debate. The question is, are they created units of DNA function? And yes, that's what the evidence suggests. So they're not dealing with the issue. Viruses are incapable of surviving without a host cell. Isn't that funny, Matt? That is, the ERVs are more likely rogue products of the genomes of their hosts. You're not going to see stated clearly deal with any of this, or even demonstrate that he understands this, or even demonstrate that he's ever even heard of the variation-inducing genetic element hypothesis, which makes predictions, successful predictions, as we've seen. And remember, we're finding these functions by accident. These evolutionary scientists are not going in and assuming function. They're finding them by accident. We're the ones assuming function. And stated clearly, just passes over it, hoping that his ignorant, evolutionary-based audience doesn't notice what he's doing, because he does not have any empirical evidence for this co-option. There's a certain class of retrotransposon that if you knock it out in the mouse genome, guess what? The mouse is developing, you knock it out, the mouse dies. The development does not continue. So, according to stated clearly, mice were not having babies successfully until this functional role was co-opted by the retrotransposon. Do you see how ridiculous this is? I debated RJ Downard and I pointed that out, and his response was literally, for one, he said, I'm not prepared for that. And two, he said, Erica told me that you'd ask that question, and yet he had no answer, because there is no answer. He was warned beforehand and yet still had no answer. That is, the ERVs are more likely rogue products of the genomes of their hosts. And the parts of genomes that look like ERVs are then seen as designed to do what they do, and well. Research will increasingly reveal the functions of these misnamed retrovirus elements. Matt, do you see the predictions that are coming from this hypothesis? The predictions when it comes to function, the prediction when it comes to the variation that can be induced through these genetic elements? But the evolutionists are not making any predictions. What are your thoughts on all that, brother? I know that was a rant, but there's a ton of information on this and we got to cover it. Go ahead, brother.
No, I mean, it makes total sense. That's why everything's so surprising to them. You know what I mean? They go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this has function. Well, that's why they're not even looking for it still. That's a secondary thing that they're doing. They're still looking at them as only viral. And when you're looking for evidence for one thing and you're ignoring everything else, you're going to find evidence for it. That's just the way things go. You're supposed to falsify your own conclusions. You're supposed to come out and say, let's see if this really holds up to scrutiny. Let's see if there's any functional things to this. And when you do that, you find, wow, that is pretty strange that it's absolutely necessary for the placenta to develop. So where did this come from? Okay, so if we use logic on this and we go backwards in time, that would mean that probably somewhere along the line, a fish got a virus, and that virus began to mutate and to change. And then all of a sudden, it hopped into one of the very first mammals, right, to ever exist. And then immediately in that mammal, it would have had to turn on a function that allowed the placenta to be a functional thing so that it can actually have young. That would have had to happen in the very first mammal. Are you kidding me? And then in both of them, in the male and female, right? So we're talking about these unique elements that are not only functional, but they also might hide function. So I want you to think about this for a minute. So if we're looking for something that has a function and we don't find it, that doesn't necessarily discount that it might not have one, from the mere fact that ERVs are now found to be epigenetically regulated. That means that they might have a switch that's turned off. So meaning, just like that gene that regulates the placenta, it's turned off most of the time. It only activates when a female becomes pregnant. So if you were to look inside and to figure out what's going on, and you see like, oh, well, I don't see any function going on. Well, that's because you're not looking at it from the perspective of maybe it has a function that needs to be regulated, something something has to happen so it does turn itself on. So just because we don't find something initially doesn't mean that it's not there. So that's one thing. So we say, yes, these were absolutely created functional DNA elements from the beginning. And that doesn't mean that they're not all from viruses. Now remember that. So obviously, if we get infected from something, so do all creatures. That's pretty obviously. So I want you to think about it. When we say, I am going to eat some chicken, we risk getting something called, the bird flu. If we eat pork, we risk the swine flu, H1N1. If we consume cattle, we risk mad cow disease. These are viral infections that come into our body and bind somewhere. And of course, they're going to bind. So I want you to think about what's going to happen when we, let's say, get mad cow disease. So now all of a sudden, we've just consumed a viral load from a piece of cattle, and it's going to get into our system, and it's going to bind somewhere. And when this binds, we're going to come along, and it's going to become eventually inert. What's going to happen is this virus is going to eventually die off, and we're no longer exude symptoms of mad cow disease, but we survived it. So when we have offspring, we're going to pass that dead viral load on. So later, if somebody were to come along and go like, look at that, in your genome, you look like you have matching ERVs to cattle. Therefore, you must be related to cattle. That's what they've done. So yes, that does look like there is evidence of this in the tree of life, but yet that's exactly what would happen if we have inside of us elements that can be passed on virally through something. Right now we're dealing with the coronavirus, which means somebody consumed a bat or a snake that consumed a bat, because it has both viral loads. So one day somebody's going to come along and they're going to say, look at that, we share the virus, an ERV of that of a bat or a snake, so we must be related somewhere in the deep past to those things, when in reality, no, that is not what's going on. So anyway, I'm going to keep ranting, but did you know that there are viruses that are in us that don't exist outside of that? Now, I hope that's it. I can't really see my screen too good, but I'm going to actually zoom in. I want to make sure I don't have the wrong thing up. No. Okay, so there are two different types of ERVs that we have inside of us right now, and that's what we have. You can see it's called CERV. We also have PTERV, and these are two families, entire families of ERVs that are not found in humans. They're only found in primates, in every form of primates, but not in humans whatsoever. So this is where storytelling comes in. They have to say, well, they're new. These are brand new, and they must have been inserted after the fact, after we split. And therefore, their story, which they can't prove, of course, they have to say, well, now this got inserted at a much later time, but the reason that we don't have to worry about it is because they're dead now. These viruses don't really do anything until you investigate what they actually do. They're not dead functional things. ATP is required to actually run these ERVs. So you tell me, like, do you really believe that the body's going to take energy from itself to supply a dead, useless junk material going on? No, we know it has function. We just don't know what it is. So they're busy looking for detrimental things because they believe that they're only viruses and that's all that they really do. And they have to sacrifice and say, uh-oh, they actually do have function. But that's just hearsay, because the only reason they must have function is because there's so many of them in the body. Post hoc, ad hoc rescue devices. That's all.
Right. That's a great point. That's a great point. When we were talking earlier before this too, we were pointing out how the idea of junk DNA, the idea of these genomic fossils, these, ancient remnant viral leftovers, according to evolution, it is an either use it or lose it type philosophy. So if this all really was useless junk, and yet after millions and millions of years, the cell, the genome is still keeping all of this junk around, that doesn't make any sense, because that would be a waste of resources, a waste of energy for the cell. to constantly replicate from generation after generation. And they have to say that these were viral infections that were inserted millions of years ago. That's why they're looking at the primates or looking at humans. And they're looking at these positions in the genome where we share these viral-like sequences. But they have to say that this occurred millions of years ago in a past common ancestor where during the split, right, this was made possible. But they assume junk, they don't assume function, and yet what we are finding is function, which is confirmation of the hypothesis that suggests these are variation inducing genetic elements. So you're going to notice that that's what they do, is they constantly point to the hallmark characteristics of viruses as if this is some type of argument against our position, claiming that these are created units of DNA function. That's not the point. That is agnostic to the debate, because nobody's denying the viral-like nature of these genetic elements. So, yeah, I got a few more things to say, but I think I'll save it for, because he's going to touch on a few things coming up in the video, and then I'll save it for that.
Super quick, before we look at how endogenous retroviruses act as evidence for evolution. An endogenous retrovirus is a stretch of DNA found in your DNA that got there when one of your ancestors was infected by a retrovirus. On rare occasions, virus genes find their way into sperm and egg cells where they can go on to become a permanent part of a species' genome. Your endogenous retroviruses act as historical records of past infections suffered by your ancestors. Now, at this point, you might be asking, how do we know for sure that genes with similar sequences to virus genes actually came from viruses? Has this been experimentally demonstrated? In several different cases, yes. Scientists recently took human cells incubated in petri dishes and slightly mutated the DNA of one of our endogenous retroviruses to see if it would start producing viruses again. Sure enough, it worked. An extinct virus was revived from a DNA sequence found in our very own human genome. Endogenous retroviruses really are the remaining scars of ancient virus infections. So, how does this all act as evidence that humans, chimps, and other primates really evolved from a common ancestor? In 2003, the first draft of the chimp genome was published.
Maybe stop it there real quick, Matt.
Yep.
So I want to point out that this experiment, and then I know you've got a couple things to say on it too, Matt. This experiment has been brought up by other critics before as well, which again is not addressing the key issue. And I addressed this in my book, Special Creation. You know, I find it funny that these critics put forth arguments that they actually believe we haven't looked at and dealt with. So I have a whole section on endogenous retroviruses that goes into great detail on what we're talking about here. And on page 103, actually, the first page of this chapter, I go over a critic who looks to this Phoenix virus experiment. And I point out that the critic completely misunderstands the point of dispute. Just like we covered in the beginning, the question is not whether ERV-like sequences can form viruses. In fact, one creationist hypothesis for the origin of viruses post-fall is that they arose from ERV-like sequences in our genome. For example, instead of coming into our genome from the outside, they may have originated from within our genomes. The more important question is what? Are ERV-like sequences functional units of DNA? And I know I keep pointing that out, but it's because the evolutionists don't seem to understand the fact that they are not answering this key question. The Phoenix virus experiment does not answer this question. The data strongly supports the VIGE model. And I point out, well, I got a whole chapter on this, but that's what is funny about that section, Matt, and you're familiar with that experiment as well, that once again, it's not addressing the key issue. It's not actually helping their case for universal common ancestry. What are your thoughts, brother?
No, that's that experiment is used because it was the finally the very first one where they actually got some kind of results. But let me tell you guys what really happened. Um, they took this Phoenix virus, which what they believed was one of the oldest, and it didn't really have any of the functional attributes to it. So what they did is they tried to reactivate it. Unfortunately, nothing actually happened. So they went into the lab and they altered it. They changed around what it was because it was a failed retrovirus, actually, is what it became. So they had to adjust the base pairs so that it could actually do something. So in a laboratory, yes, they were able to manipulate and change it around until finally it started producing something that was viral-like, and it looked very similar to HIV. So they were like, finally, we have something that can show that these virus looking things can actually produce viruses. But you notice it didn't replicate itself. It created something very different than what it actually was. So what we're looking at is genetic degradation of something that's going on from a viral load that's going on inside the body. It wasn't coming inside and doing what they expected an ERV to do, which was actually clone itself and mimic itself. But probably because they were adjusting it, right? Because when you manipulate something in a lab, you're going to get something strange and very, very unique. What a lot of people think COVID is actually. So you can force manipulate a lot of things in a lab. So it's not always the best thing to use as an example. And plus, they are assuming that it was producing harmful virus-like elements. Remember, they assume because it looked like HIV, but in reality, they don't know. They're not sure what it was or what it actually did. It was just doing something, and they're like, wow, okay, well, therefore, that's perfect enough. That's good enough evidence for us. We're just going to go with that because they finally have something to go on, right? But within the published human genome sequences, there are 98,000 human endogenous retroviruses called HERVs, right? Those are just in human beings alone. That doesn't count the other plethora that exist in bits and fragments and pieces that go on other than that. But many have problems, right? They're riddled with deleterious mutations. They contain nonsense mutations. They have deletions. There's non-replication components of HERVs that have been identified. There's all kinds of things. So this Phoenix virus is not found in anything but humans at all. Did you know that? The Phoenix virus is all it is, and it's in every human cell. So they looked around the animal kingdom to see what like we share with all the primates. They don't have it. It's just in human beings. So that again might speak, pretty big. We think that, hey, if that was there at creation and it was given to us, did it do harm through time? Did it weaken itself and burn itself out? Did it go through mutations? Is it being bombarded? Is it weaker? Viruses don't reproduce. They're not like other things where they can weed out. Selection can come along and fix it.
But Matt,
that doesn't happen. They're not reproductive. Yes.
well, I was just going to ask you the quick question too, is because the evolutionists in general, and then I'm curious as to your thoughts on this, because you've dealt with this in great detail. The evolutionists have this mindset that when they hear viruses, in the same way that when they hear bacteria, they think of something bad. They think of something that's disease causing. Is that really the case, Matt? Are most viruses bad and disease causing?
Well, if we look inside of us, we have more bacteria than we actually do blood cells. And bacteria are beneficial. They're extremely beneficial. And we actually require them. And most of them even have their own like mitochondria. So these things are very, very beneficial. And when we're looking at them from like a virologist perspective, yes, they're looking at them from a negative perspective. We want to know what disease they cause. That's the first thing we do is like, how can this hurt us and how can we fix ourselves from it? A lot of things that do beneficial things get overlooked because we're more looking at the serious aspect. We want to know what mutation is causing the cancer. That's what we look for because that's what causes the most damage. And bacteria are extremely beneficial, but we focus in on the detrimental ones so much that we forget about that, right? Like a lot of people don't really think about it too much, but we take our probiotics as supplements. We eat fruits that are fermented, so we get probiotics. And then we take foods like our supplements like fructooligosaccharides, which are prebiotics to feed the good beneficial bacteria. But viruses get such a bad rap that they're only considered very harmful and detrimental, which of course, when we're obtaining them from other things, they are. But inside of us, they're not much of that problem, right? They're actually, we see they do some beneficial things. Most ERVs, even the little tiny bits and fragments, they're doing transcription. Like when we look at them, even small ones, they're doing something, they're doing something active. Like think about how many base pairs are in a general human cell. We're looking at 3 billion, but when we're looking at an ERV, they're around 300 base pair, very, very small. So of course we're going to find more relation and things that line up to that when you're looking at a smaller portion of something. Like you even see that in the Bible codes, right? Or you can take codes and you can read it in different books and you can find things. The shorter the sentence with a program, the more it can find that can match it. But the bigger the sentence gets, the more improbable matching something would be, right? Like I would imagine that this guy, to me, it sounds like he's that type of a person that's shocked when the inside of a car looks like the other type of an inside of a car. Like he would be at a car dealership and he would open the door to the second car he's ever seen and be like, this has a seat in it and a steering wheel. The last one I saw had that too. That is crazy. I can't believe the, you know, the common descent of these things is incredible. It's like, wait, you just missed the whole concept. That's a, you know, it's a creation. You know, the creative designer built that. That's why it looks so similar. They can't see that. They don't want to see that. They're so indoctrinated to believe that no, this has to be common descent. It's the only option. Anything else is just crazy. So they're looking so intently to prove one thing, they can't see the other thing. They're blinded by their bias.
Right. So many good points. So many good points there. That that was a brilliant answer to the question, because when people think viruses, right, they typically think of something that's bad, and generally viruses don't actually cause disease. But when they jump from a different species, they jump from one species to another. Well, typically, right, Matt, the new species does not have the ability to regulate that virus properly. And then that virus tends to burn hot and fast. That's kind of what we're looking at with what's going on today with this whole pandemic. And I want to point out too that these viral-like sequences in our genetics that stated clearly is trying to say is evidence for universal common ancestry, they are actually tightly regulated into our genomes. And as you have seen, they are highly, highly functional. And this argument of co-option is nothing more than storytelling and not really an answer at all, because they don't have an answer. And the data really does suggest that these viral-like sequences, these elements, were actually created this way on purpose. And the function that they can't explain, that they explain away through co-option, which is hilarious, demonstrates this fulfilled prediction and expectation. But that's why these critics, you know, they'll point to these viruses and they'll say, you know, where did these come from? I remember that was Mark Drysdale when I debated him on Modern Day Debate. That was his number one argument. Why would God create a virus designed to kill people? Well, the point is, as Matt, as you were brilliantly touching on, the majority of viruses were created beneficial, and we see that. We see that, like you were pointing out, we have more viruses and bacteria than we actually do cells. So how come we're all not just dying? Or why isn't the species going extinct within a day or within an hour if we have that many viruses? No, the fact is most viruses are actually beneficial. Most are, or at least neutral to the kinds that they were created for. But sure, when they jump species, when they mutate due to genetic degeneration, mutation accumulation, they can go from good to bad. So don't think of viruses as always being something that's negative. You wouldn't want to live on a planet or a universe that did not have viruses or that did not have bacteria. We actually talked about this in quite a bit of detail with Dr. Jonathan Sarfati when we had him on. So a lot of people say, well, what are all of these viruses? What are all of these bacteria? What are they doing? Well, Matt, you pointed to probiotics, which is incredibly beneficial. That's why after a round of antibiotics, they say to take probiotics because the antibiotics are killing your good bacteria and your bad bacteria. Now, I'm not mixing up bacteria and viruses. They're two different things, but a lot of people have that mindset towards viruses and bacteria, the same mindset that they are bad when in fact they're good. For example, the viruses, they are controlling the number of bacteria in our gut. They're controlling the number of species of bacteria. It's all about regulation. It's all about healthy life processes in the cell. And that's why everything we see here is evidence of design, and this variation inducing genetic element hypothesis makes these predictions. And we can make future predictions about the types of functionality that we should expect in these viral-like sequences. So it's just funny how they look to this, Matt, right, as this number one line of evidence proving universal common ancestry, when in fact it's some of the most fascinating lines of evidence for our model, the creation model. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I mean, we chose this video because he said it's his best evidence. It's his best video. We didn't pick some easy video like these internet idiots do for us, you know, like pick a video from 1 year ago, 1 minute long, and just try to pick apart something that was supposed to be vague and simplistic for an audience that we're teaching. Oh no, we're going to go for their best. That way they can't complain about anything. So we're coming after you. You know what I mean? I want this guy to think about it. I think logically. Do you literally believe, I want an answer to this. Do you think that a virus hit your ancestor, went dead, later gained a function to kill viruses that attack your body? Think about that, because that is actually what some ERVs do. They kill viruses. So if you're telling me that a dead virus became active and created something to do to kill its own kind, is what would be your rationale to that? What is the logic behind something that would kill its own kind? Why is that? You know what I mean? From a viral standpoint or a parasitic standpoint, you don't want to kill the host because then you die. You want to spread. That is your goal. It's not to kill you. It's to take nutrients. It's to strive you to be, you're the home of where this thing is now. So think about it from that perspective. Why would the virus evolve the ability to kill itself and others? That makes no sense. So that's one big issue, right? But you see, when scientists assume that these sequences that we find with the viral DNA, and we find that it's in 2 different animals, let's say that the 2 different species, but they're related. Doesn't really matter if they are. But then they probably are related. Let's just say 2 dog kind, or a wolf and a dog, okay? And most of them have a common ancestor. We'll just give you the benefit of the doubt and just say, that species of dog and the fox, let's just say that those are the same kind, and they go right back to a common ancestor. No problem. But how about a cat and a dog? Are they related? In evolutionary terms, maybe, but a very, very long time ago. Definitely not a root common ancestor bringing forth dogs and cats. You know, but what do we know? We know that endogenous retrovirusally speaking, that would be completely wrong, and we can prove it with chiroviruses. Have you ever heard of these? Basically, these viruses exist in the guts and the stomachs of dogs, and they cause all kinds of problems, because anybody that has a dog and they take it to the hospital and it has this virus, it's going to need take massive care to make it even survive this virus. And it can be done, of course, but anyway, I diverge from what I'm talking about. Basically, where do we look when we investigate what other things have this? Well, we see this virus in dogs and in cats and in panda bears, something that don't even share common ancestors, but they're in nothing else. Why would that be? Why were they not found in the wolf, but they're found in the dog? Why are, you look in cats, and the cats now have them, but yet you look in the root common ancestor of the cat and you go, well, it's weird. The saber-toothed cat doesn't seem to have it. So, and then you look in the bear species, the only one that has it's a panda bear. So we it breaks phylogeny. So you're trying to tell us that these viruses are matching because of root common ancestors in human beings and primates, and that's how we can prove common ancestry. But what happens when it breaks common ancestry? What happens when we find these viruses just in one species and then just in another in the same spot? So to me, it's kind of like saying, well, we have a puzzle, right? Here's where it comes down to the evolutionary debate versus the creation debate. And I can break it down for you like this. Think about it from an insertion perspective. Would it work like this? Like imagine building a car, right? You have a bolts that hold on the tire for one particular car, and then the designer would use the same bolts for another car of that same type or same size. But then when that same designer wants to build a truck for his line, he might not use that. It's a bigger tire, requires bigger bolts, something stronger, right? That's just obvious. So that from a evolutionary perspective, anything that would share the same bolts is obviously related, and anything that has a different size bolt, it's not as related. But since it does have bolts, it's still related, but not of close combination anymore. You know, they diverge probably at some time in the past. So I would say now let's look at it from the outward perspective. You know, imagine a puzzle inside of your body, and a virus comes along as a puzzle piece and can only fit in a particular place, right? Well, this place is the same in us that it would be in primates. Since we are genetically very similar, it makes sense. It's like the car and the bolt, right? So think about it like this. Each insertion appears to have a structure of that sentence starting with a capital letter and ending with a period. So all insertions are going to be very similar to one another for that very reason. But either way, the evidence is on our side. Beneficially functional, requiring ATP, performing transcription factors, acquiring deleterious mutations, making large percentages of the genome. You know, all of this is evidence for the creation model, because if you're looking at it from a created perspective, we're seeing decreasing. We're seeing deleterious mutations building up, and these viral loads becoming broken over time and fractionating, and their function very rare and minute. And that's what we see with genetic entropy. And if you look about it from a perspective of bombardment, well, yeah, you are going to be bombarded with a virus, just like like eating viruses from a cow and getting mad cow disease and finding that the viral load impacts you in the same place, because we share a lot with mammals. You know, a cattle and a human share what, like 75% of the genetic similarity. That's quite high. So when we find genetic similarities like viruses in the same place, that's to be expected, because we are very similar. It's the same designers creating us. So when you break a window, or let's say you're driving your car, what's going to be the first to wear out? Well, it's going to be the same in every vehicle. It's probably going to be the tires. It's going to wear out much faster than your door would. The inside of your door isn't going to wear out because it's not contacting the ground and sliding across it. So we expect the same wear and tear to be in similar things to be the same. And it's the same with us that it would be in primates. So we are going to see some impact, right? Obviously, a chimpanzee got SIV from a monkey. The SIV doesn't affect a monkey, but when it gets into the chimpanzee, it affects them and becomes HIV, and then it can cause them problems, just like it can spread to us and be HIV and cause us problems, because it was never intended to be in us. It was a created element for them, not for us. So it makes logical sense that just because it's there doesn't mean that it was always intended to be there. And yes, it's a virus inside of us, and it's a very detrimental one. So it doesn't mean we were created with it. So we're seeing a lot of things that are created, and then we're seeing some things that are obviously embedded into us, and we're just saying, oh, they all were embedded into us. That's not the case. We have to distinguish between what was and what wasn't, and that comes down to function. So anyway, sorry, man, I went too far of a rant. Let's go back to the video.
No, that's good. That's good, brother. Actually, before you go to the video, let me make one point. Because everything you're saying is just so good, and you talk as long as you want, brother, because as we always like to do with these rebuttal videos, we like to leave no stone unturned, and that's why we rarely get a rebuttal video back, because we make sure they're irrefutable. This is irrefutable. They can't address this evidence that screams design without misrepresenting or straw manning. For example, you've got these critics who will, I'm going to share screen real quick, who will once again, oh, wait till I screen share. Okay. Typically I lag when I'm screen sharing. So those things like, well, they'll point to the hallmark characteristics of viruses again. Well, what's the function? What's the point of the gag and pull genes, for example? And once again, it's more demonstration that they don't understand our model, which is why they constantly misrepresent and straw man. So right here is a good article which talks about how the transposable elements which cause the variation within the host genome are the gag and pull genes. The gene that they regulate is the ENV protein. The syncytin gene is attached to the ENV gene of the so-called ERVW element, which is expressed in a part of the placenta called the syncytiotrophoblasts. Say that 10 times fast. So, I highly recommend that these critics actually go and study our model before they attack it or try and use an agnostic line of evidence or agnostic line of reasoning to prop up their fish to fisherman story. So right here, certain mobile retrovirus particles originally could have moved from site to site within the genome, thereby changing the way genes are regulated within the host genome. It makes much more sense if retroviruses were originally designed as part of the host genome and escaped from the cell after the accumulation of mutations, right, Matt? Like you're pointing out, genetic entropy, genetic degeneration, mutations accumulate from generation to generation. So therefore, a lot of these viral-like sequences that are bad or disease causing, or they've jumped from one species to another, like you're saying with the HIV virus, right? The HIV virus would not have originated within the human genome, but that HIV virus could have originated within the genome of another organism where it was functional, where it was essential. It's when they cross species that the species that now has that virus can't regulate the virus. But the whole point, the bigger picture, which they can't get through their head, is what is the origin of these viral-like sequences? What is the origin of viruses in general? If most of them are beneficial, they're there for regulation, they're functional, these viral-like sequences are tightly regulated into the host genomes, they're functional. Obviously, this is evidence that they were created, especially if these viruses require a host to begin with. That means the host genome was there first because remember, we look to the created heterozygosity hypothesis where God would have front-loaded Adam and Eve and the created kinds with pre-existing functional DNA differences. But the variation-inducing genetic element hypothesis then suggests that God would have also front-loaded functional DNA elements into the genomes of living organisms. That's where you get your ALU sequences. That's where you get some of these so-called pseudogenes, which we now are highly functional to organisms. That's where we get the endogenous retroviral-like sequences. These are all there for function, for purpose. They're there for the benefit of the organism and also for variation. So, of course, through genetic entropy, genetic degeneration, mutation accumulation, these viruses can go rogue. They can go bad, oftentimes because they're jumping genes, right, Matt? Oftentimes they can jump within the host genome. And when the evolutionist looks to that, they look at it as something novel, as in maybe this was the insertion spot from outside, when in fact this occurred from within, right? The jumping gene jumped and moved positions from within the genome. They're looking at it totally wrong. That's why they can't make any successful predictions. And that's why we have paper upon paper upon paper that we love. But these critics, like stated clearly, they just gloss over it. Well, sometimes they might have a benefit. No, it's not sometimes, okay? We have genome-wide functionality. Now, it's more so a trajectory because what we have is preliminary data. That's why we can make future testable predictions that they can't make. And remember, Remember, I want to ask stated clearly. I want to ask him if these really are just junk, if these really are just the ancient remnants of viral infections millions of years ago, then why did the cell decide to keep them around for so long? It's wasteful of energy and resources for the cell. Selection should have eliminated this junk. That goes for the pseudogenes, that goes for the ALU sequences. They shouldn't be there. It's use it or lose it. That indicates they're there for a reason. They're there for a purpose. That's why the cell is keeping them around. It makes sense that they're created units of DNA function. So it's amazing how genetics and genetic data has really overturned universal common ancestry, and they really have nothing left to offer. And I guess that was my rant, Matt, but yeah, let's go ahead, brother.
Good one. Good one. All right.
DNA and human DNA sequences are incredibly similar, but unless we dive deeper, this fact alone can't tell us for sure if evolution is a better explanation than the fixed species idea. We already know that humans and chimps have similar traits. If DNA codes for traits, we should expect our DNA to be similar as well, right? In many cases, this is a reasonable point, but not in the case of endogenous retroviruses. Remember, your endogenous retroviruses show you the unique history of specific virus infections suffered by your ancestors. They're like scars in our DNA that an individual acquires during its lifetime and can pass on to his or her descendants, but only his or her descendants. Here we're looking at maps of human and chimp chromosomes side by side. Chromosomes are the structures in our cells that contain our DNA. If humans and chimps share a common ancestor, and if at least some of the infections we find in our genome occurred before the chimp-human split, we should find the same virus genes in the exact same locations in both human and chimp genomes. In contrast, if humans and chimps are not related, they should not share the same history of virus infections. Now, of course, it is possible that throughout history, both species, humans and chimps, were infected by some of the same viruses. Humans and chimps sometimes get each other sick today. But if chimps and humans are not related, those virus genes will not be found in identical locations of both chimp and human DNA. This is because when a retrovirus infects a host, there are many different spots in the host genome where it might end up inserting itself. Extensive lab experiments with retroviruses have found that there are far more than 10 million possible insertion spots in the human genome. In other words, the chance of a human and a chimp getting infected in the exact same spot by the same specific type of virus is far less than 1 in 10 million.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
Well, it's ridiculously unlikely, and it gets worse fast. If two individuals are both infected with just 12 of the same viruses, the chance that each of those 12 inserted themselves into the exact same DNA locations in both hosts is less than 1.
Pause it real quick, Matt.
Atoms estimated to.
So I want to point out, and I know you're noticing it, and I think the audience is probably noticing it as well. And this is just going to be quick. You'll notice he's not, as I pointed out in the beginning, he's not dealing with, once again, the key question. Are these, and this is about the 10 times I've asked it, are these really the leftover remnants of past viral infections over millions and millions of years, or are they created units of DNA function? So his argument is relying on the assumption that they really are the ancient remnants of past viral infections. No, if they are created units of DNA function, if they are variation-inducing genetic elements like the data suggests and cannot be refuted because they can't provide us any paper or any empirical data showing a non-functional endogenous retrovirus going from non-functional to functional. And I've debated a number of PhD biologists. Dr. Dan Dodgeball Stern Cardinal has failed miserably on that. It's almost laughable. And Speed of Sound recently in one of his streams, he was reviewing that video that I put out where I debated RJ Downard on ALU sequences and endogenous retroviruses and really demolished him. Speed of Sound says, Stanning's always asking this question as if we can provide that. You know, this co-option would have happened so long ago that we don't see it in real time. It's like, yeah, that's the whole point. It's your religion. It's a philosophy. It's just like orphan genes, where they assume that these taxonomically restricted and highly essential genes somehow went from non-functional, or somehow a non-coding area of the genome popped up to be a functional, like an endogenous or like an orphan gene, when in fact there'd be 5 or 6 beneficial mutations that would be required to
develop something like an orphan gene. Same thing goes with these endogenous retroviruses. So it's so funny that, Speed of Sound and these critics, they admit it, that they can't present that data. That's why it all suggests that these are created units of DNA function. Now that means since we share more with the chimpanzees, we share more with primates in general, Matt, in terms of morphology, anatomy, physiology, that means we would also expect to share more of these genetic elements with the apes than we would with a dog or a fish. We expect a nested hierarchy. So where they want to look at these viral-like sequences and they want to build these phylogenetic charts and they want to demonstrate some type of fish to fisherman evolution because we share more with the chimpanzee than we do with a dog or a fish. No, we expect those hierarchies. You can stand back and you can tell you're going to share more with the chimpanzee than you would with a banana plant because we share more in terms of morphology, anatomy, and physiology with the chimpanzee. So we would also expect to share more of these endogenous retroviruses with the chimpanzee than we would with another form of life that we're not so similar to. Does that make sense, Matt?
Oh, it does, of course, because if you think about it, so you start at creation and you're looking at two different species, but yet as similar as can possibly be. Now, you take a human being and you take a chimpanzee, what do you expect us to be the same in? What do you expect us to be different in? Obviously, they have a coat of fur. So if we're going to be different, it would be different on the bacteria that we have on our skin and they have on their fur. Lo and behold, that is what's different. Then you look inside of our gut and you find a lot of similarities. The difference is actually in the colon because they were created to eat plants, right? So they can be, they walk over, pull roots and leaves off trees, and they're omnivore. They can do digestion very, very easily. We start pulling leaves off of trees, we got to be really careful because we were created to eat fruit off the trees. We were frugivore, so it's a lot different than what they can do and what we can do. So we expect there to be differences in the obvious things. Now, the same thing goes with viruses, right? So if these were created elements and they were created at the beginning, of course they would be in the same place because they weren't later additions to the genome because of viruses that randomly can be placed anywhere and yet just happen to land in the same place. Rather, they were created in that place because they have functional elements of what they're doing in the body and where they actually come from. See, everybody thinks this is like an open and shut case. Oh, we know exactly where these endogenous retroviruses come from. This is so ridiculous. I can't believe people, creationists, are trying to even argue against this. You guys are the ones arguing it amongst yourselves as well. You just don't know it because you're so busy thinking this is the open and shut, clear-cut case and the best evidence again for evolution that there is, when you don't even realize that there's multiple theories that contradict each other and that go against where these ERVs actually came from. So one of them is called the virus first model. Another one is called the escape hypothesis. And then there's even another one called the giant or mimivirus theory. And then there's also the VIRGE theory, right? The variation inducing genetic elements theory. There's multiple theories that exist to explain where ERVs come from. So it's not an open and shut case. It's an assumption of the deep past. It's the paradigm driving the conclusion. It's evolution trying to prove evolution all the time. So that's just another thing I wanted to throw in there for the audience, because everyone's always like, ERVs, these are the best evidence. Really? Because not even evolutionists believe that it's the best evidence because they're falsifying it themselves. So now we can carry on.
Yeah, let me share screen on one thing real quick, brother, because I think this is important. Now, what we do, so for example, we have shown source after source, paper after paper, not from the creationist literature, but from the secular literature itself, demonstrating that these viral-like sequences are better understood as functional DNA elements. The endogenous retrovirus did not name itself the endogenous retrovirus. Okay. The evolutionists, for example, they've looked at these genes that look like they're broken, and so they've named them pseudogenes. Well, those genes did not name themselves pseudogenes. The evolutionists love to hijack things, and they're hijacking functional genes and assuming universal common ancestry and then calling them pseudogenes and saying, oh, look, we share pseudogenes with various forms of life, therefore we inherited these shared mistakes. No, that's been overturned, just like the endogenous retroviral arguments have been overturned. And I want to screen share. This is an Answers in Genesis article, which I highly recommend. And oftentimes the evolutionists will say, oh, that's a creationist source. Okay, we've shown a great deal of creationist sources and a great deal of evolutionary sources and secular sources. Deal with it. They can't deal with the data. So this is good, and I want to read it. So all viruses are molecular machines, which means they are designed. But God didn't design his creation to be killing machines. Therefore, these machines must have been part of his original very good creation and began to deteriorate ever since. It should be no surprise to biblical creationists that many ERVs are degenerate machines. Remember, they didn't start off degenerate. Just like Adam and Eve would not have started off with mutations and genetic mistakes, because a lot of evolutionists, they have this straw man argument where they say, why would God create Adam and Eve or the biblical kinds with mistakes? No, they're assuming that every DNA difference is a mistake. But now what we know about the overturning of junk DNA, we know that the evidence of function in the genome reflects the created heterozygosity hypothesis or the design diversity hypothesis. Adam and Eve would have had no mistakes. And these viral-like elements, these variation-inducing genetic elements, they would have been perfect, functional, essential. And as this says, they would have degenerated ever since. It should be no surprise, I read that part, in this fallen world, genetic entropy is ever at work, causing good DNA sequences to quit working efficiently. Less efficient DNA sequences are subsequently selected against and disappear eventually. In the case of ERVs, degenerate DNA sequences are now malfunctioning and infecting other genomes. In the example of the koala, so they do look to this example. I actually dealt with this in a previous video. The ERVs are now beneficial to the koala. However, as Dr. Roca stated, this may not always have been the case. At first, the ERVs may not have helped the host. Rather than asking how ERVs support common ancestry, perhaps the better question is to ask this: why do so many ERVs exist in the first place? So the point is, on closer inspection, the evidence suggests design and creation. Here's some information on the so-called koala study. Koala study reveals clues about origins of the human genome. You can go into a number of evolutionary sources that I love to read because you can see their assumptions when looking at, for example, ERVs and how they point to these viral-like characteristics, but they're not dealing with the actual key question and key issues. You can see when you go to common descent, all the same lines of evidence: endogenous retroviruses, pseudogenes, right? Look, pseudogenes as shared errors. It all has to do with this junk DNA paradigm. Evolutionists assume evolutionary leftovers. They assume genomic fossils. They assume ancient viral infections, remnants of these ancient viral infections, because they assume millions of years of common descent. But yet what we're actually finding out is that the evidence suggests that God has front-loaded his creation with functional DNA elements, functional DNA differences. This is all evidence of design. This is all evidence of forward thinking, especially since we know a lot of these jumping genes induce variation, which is evidence of forward thinking, which points back to the forward thinker. So anyways, yeah, go ahead, brother.
That was good. Back to the video, you mean? Yeah, let's do it.
To get a rough idea of how many insertions are shared between humans and chimps, researchers scanned both of our genomes looking for a type of retrovirus they knew was common in humans. They found 211 insertions in the human genome and 208 in chimpanzees. To figure out if any of these insertions are in the same locations in both humans and chimps, they compared the unique flanking DNA sequences on either side of each insertion. If you think of the virus as a scar, the flanking sequences are the healthy bits of tissue around the scar that tell you where the scar is located. They found that we share not just one, not just 12, but 205 insertions. 205 out of 214 for this particular virus group. This makes perfect sense if we consider the evolutionary view of life. The 205 shared viruses were inserted sometime before the chimp-human split. The 6 insertions unique to humans and the 3 unique to chimps either represent insertions that happened after the split, or they represent deletion mutations that removed a few viruses in just one lineage after the chimp-human split.
Oh, Matt, you're on mute, brother. You're on mute. Matt, if you want to repeat that. Yeah. Yeah. I put you on mute because every time you share the audio, we can hear double. So muting works the best. So yeah. If you want to maybe go back and repeat what you were saying, brother.
I was just saying that you guys recognize the unfalsifiable nonsense that anytime they find an endogenous retrovirus that doesn't line up, they just say, oh, that just happened after the split. They always have a rescue device, no matter how illogical, no matter how implausible. If it doesn't match, it's okay because it still proves evolution. Notice that? They don't make any predictions, and anything they find contradictory, it doesn't matter. It's just more proof of evolution because it must have happened then. Well, what evidence do you have? Well, none. It's there. Okay. So no evidence at all. Great. I guess I'll just believe it and not question anything, right? Kind of like Mary Schweitzer after she found she came up with the idea that maybe iron can preserve the dinosaur soft tissue for millions of years. No fight back from the evolutionary community. They all just agreed, okay, makes sense. Like, imagine if
what
we
they want. Right. What they want is their cake, and they want to eat it too, because we look to orphan genes, we look to these human-specific endogenous retroviruses, right, Matt? Because of the function and the purpose, we point to these as a way to determine the kind boundary. But yet they, like you said, they just say, well, these occurred specifically in the human line. Like my second debate with Gutsy Gibbon, she failed miserably on orphan genes when I asked her to explain orphan genes according to the evolutionary model. And it is assumed through circular logic that, well, orphan genes exist, they're taxonomically restricted. We don't actually have any real empirical evidence that shows non-functional DNA popping up to be functional to become an orphan gene. So de novo gene synthesis must be real because orphan genes exist, and orphan genes exist because of de novo gene synthesis, and this happens specifically in the human line. And it's all circular, it's all assuming universal common ancestry. When it comes to the ERV, same thing. We show them 20, 30 papers demonstrating that ERVs act as DNA regulatory elements. You were talking about earlier, Matt, how the activity of these transposable elements are actually tightly controlled by what? Epigenetic mechanisms. Epigenetic mechanisms and specific RNA molecules. So these evolutionists want us to believe that these highly intricate and highly complex genetic systems came about. You ready, Matt? Came about by an ancient invasion of RNA viruses. Science fiction. Science fiction is best, Matt. Because think about this. If you had a painting, beautiful painting, and you got a blind painter, or you blindfolded a painter and told him to just apply random brush strokes to the painting, the chances are he's going to ruin the painting as compared to making it better. So if you were to get these random viral infections that become endogenous eventually because they fix themselves into the host genome, it would most likely disrupt the genome that it has infected. It's not going to co-opt some incredibly important functional role in development. right, in embryological development or in immune response or cell stress responses, determining cell types. I mean, Matt, is this not science fiction? All of this amazing functionality came about through the invasion. It's like a science fiction movie, you know, the invasion of the RNA virus that suddenly, through co-option, became essential in mammalian genomes. Like, I mean, it's just ridiculous, Matt.
That's why so many theories exist, I believe, for it, right? Like I was saying earlier, right? They've got their virus first model, then they have the escape hypothesis model, the giant virus theory, and then they have the regressive model, which tries to refute all of them at the same time. And the escape hypothesis, I like to call it the dodgeball hypothesis now for our new team. They got, you know, it's a great one. They can just like, oh, it's, you know, it just a co-option or whatever. You can basically just invoke anything of the past. None of these have any evidence, which is great. That's why they're all just like hypothesis, and they throw it around. They go, oh, our model's way better than yours. And this is where they came from. But in reality, they all do the same thing. They all just assume evolution to be true in the first place, and then just gather evidence of any type of all to say, this must be how they got there. We can't guarantee it, and we don't have any proof for it, but it must have happened because there they are. It's the paradigm driving the conclusion every single time. Take for today, how many complete HERVKs are there? Well, about 50 to 60. That's not very many in the genome, right? So, but what I mean complete, they're very large ERVs. They're not small ones that are broken up bits and fragments that there's thousands and thousands of. Oh no, these are complete, entire functional ones, right? So now we have these very large ones. Chimpanzees have about 20 of the same family. 13 of these are in the same spot as humans, but not the rest. What do? Well, they use their typical, well, they must have been inserted after. Okay, can you prove that? Well, no. Do they have function? Well, yeah, but that's just because there's so many. What? It does. What do you mean? There's only like 11. What do you mean so many? That's for the bits and fragments, not complete ones. There's only 50 to 60 of those. So we're not dealing with very many now. We're dealing with a small handful that are very large and very complete, and that mutations have destroyed. You know, mutations have made a mess of these things through the thousands of years that they've been around. So there's no doubt about that. So what are we seeing? We're seeing evidence for our model in a clear state. And we're seeing the viruses going extinct, like the H1N1, right? Mutations are building up and destroying it in real time, in shortest amount of time. And how many sicknesses and colds and diseases have you had from viruses in your lifetime alone? A lot. I myself have. You get sick. Sometimes people get sick just once a year. You know, they get strep throat, or they get the flu once a year. But guess what? That's going to imprint in your body at some point. So it's going to look like there's lots of diseases in the past, but there's also lots of created elements. That's why they can't fathom that these were probably in the same spot, because they have the same function. They can't fathom that because they don't think they have function. They only find function secondarily, not by looking for them, but because they're investigating what disease they cause. And then they go, wow, look at that. It's transcribing something. And then boom, they go, well, that's just random. You know, the dead virus just decided to kick on some random function. I think I heard myself there, but it's all good. We'll go back to the video. We're almost done.
And the last thing I'll say to that is, in light of all this data, you'll get arguments that still reflect a strong misunderstanding of the model we're putting forth, because we have pointed out that we can still have what? Internal and external escapees. And I want to point out that an internal escapee can simply be due to genetic entropy, be due to a mutation, right? This is all evidence of the fall. So once again, the lines of argumentation that they look to, the fact that they like to point to, hey, these are hallmark characteristics of viruses, viral-like sequences. No, they don't get it. They don't get it. We're not disagreeing with that. That's why the evidence better suggests, Matt, right, that these viral-like sequences had to have originated within the genomes. They're created. They're designed that way. That's it. But they don't deal with that. They don't deal with the bigger picture. And the last thing I'll say is stated clearly. He destroyed himself because he pointed out the fact that yes, homology can be explained through common design as well. He admitted that. But then he says common design can't explain ERVs because ERVs are the ancient remnants of past viral infections. Do you see how he destroyed himself? He doesn't even realize it. No. If they are actually created units of DNA function, then the same thing applies as the homology, because now they're there and they're in similar spots because they're created that way. And chimps share more in terms of morphology, physiology, and anatomy with humans than humans do with a banana plant or with fish or with a dog. So now this natural hierarchy that the design model, sure, the evolutionary model predicts, but the differentiating line of evidence is function. And the function is on the side of the creationist. That's all I got to say, brother.
All right, here we go.
We want to believe the fixed
Sorry, let me rewind a second.
present deletion mutations that removed a few viruses in just one lineage after the chimp-human split. In contrast, if we want to believe the fixed species view, we're forced to conclude that these viruses are simply shared by coincidence. When we do the math, even making sure to account for the 9 viruses not shared by the 2 species, the chance of this happening by coincidence is less than 1 in this crazy number right here. This evidence should be enough for even the most reluctant yet rational person to carefully set aside the fixed species view. Endogenous retrovirus DNA alone is more than enough to independently confirm what we already knew from the study of fossils. That said, what we've seen here is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many other lines of DNA evidence available. Together they demonstrate beyond all reasonable doubt that humans and chimpanzees did evolve from a common ancestor. We are family.
Matt, we got to pull up that Gutsy Gibbon. We got to pull up that Gutsy Gibbon video if you, maybe after when we're done, where she points out, it's like I'm looking in a mirror. That's what this reminds me of. At the end, we'll end with some humor. We'll pull that out. We'll pull that out.
For sure. That was my favorite. I love the ending right there. So ridiculous. We are family. Can't you see yourself reflected back?
And here's the thing. He still doesn't understand clearly. Even his argumentation doesn't consider the fact that we have mutational hotspots. We actually have parts in our genome that are more prone to viral infections, that are more prone to mutations. Okay. If I had my air conditioner break in my Chevy Cruze and my Honda Civic in the exact same place, in the exact same way, that doesn't prove that the Honda Civic and the Chevy Cruze inherited that broken air conditioner from some past skateboard ancestor. It's ridiculous. Common environmental problems, just like the gulo pseudogene, even the evolutionary community would point to mutational hotspots to explain a lot of the discrepancies in their model. Mutational hotspots are a thing. Now, that being the case, when it comes to the endogenous retroviruses, no, the evidence seems to suggest that they are created units of DNA function, and therefore it makes sense that we would share more of those with the chimpanzee than we would with other forms of life. By definition, God had to create humans to be more similar to some creatures and less similar to other creatures. That means when it comes to the functional DNA elements that God front-loaded into the created kinds, that means whatever creatures that humans are more similar to, humans would then share more functional genetic elements with that creature. It doesn't make any sense. That's why Aaron Ra's phylogeny challenge is fallacious. It's illogical. It's a straw man. He's trying to say that God should have created humans equally distant from all forms of life, equally distant from chimpanzees as they are to fish. No, a 2-year-old can tell you that humans are going to share more with the chimpanzee than they will with the fish. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I mean, I just see it like I don't think they really looked at it from the other perspective. They're so busy trying to focus on the single conclusion that they want to gather from everything that they've forgotten, like, oh, there is a possible alternative. Kind of like there's other theories that try to explain where these came from. There's also theories that explain from our perspective why they were created. So he probably should have learned a little bit about that first rather than attacking the very thing that he doesn't really understand or know about, because how that's a more illogical thing. But you made a good point a minute ago when you were saying there obviously are weaker spots in the genome, and that is where viruses would attach, and that is obvious. And now we know this for a fact when it comes for mutations, because mutations are something that we can gather because we're really looking for them. You know, we're hunting down mutations because we need to identify specific mutations causing specific problems so that we can go, okay, what caused that mutation and how can we reverse the issue? So take, for example, where do mutations accumulate more, in the nuclear DNA or the mitochondrial DNA? Well, we know it's the mitochondrial, so we have a place to start. Now, where in the mitochondrial DNA does it? Well, we look inside the mitochondria and we find fast mutation rates. We go, wow, that's really good. I wonder if there's a place inside the mitochondria that has even more. We look around, you know, we look in all the different genes that are in there, and we find one at the top. It's called the D loop, and we go, wow, that region right there has a faster mutation rate as well. So in that region, it's really fast. So then we look inside the region, and guess what? There's regions inside of that region that collect more mutations, and that's called a hypervariable region 1. So that collects more mutations than the other regions inside there. So when we say mutations are accumulating in that region, more of them are gathering in that particular spot than anywhere else. Does that mean now that we're related to primates as well because mutations also accumulate in that particular region? No, it just means that that part of the mitochondria is susceptible to mutations more than any other region. It doesn't prove common descent. Proves common design. We see that that part, that design function of that region is susceptible to mutations more, just like viruses are more susceptible to different areas depending on the type of virus that they are. It's simple logic and it's not hard to explain. That's it. So that was really good. And then when we talk about gene function, like he brought up one thing, and I was going to show it earlier. It's like, here's a specific HERVW, and that is controlled. That is a particular gene that we see now, right? When we look specifically at that. And what does that do? Well, it can cause homeotypic and heterotypic cell-to-cell fusion. Okay, tell me that that's not important. It's literally something that if you stop and you remove that virus, you die and you can't reproduce anymore, because that's required for the placental development as well, they found. So highly advanced things that they're saying just arose spontaneously because there were lots of them. Irrational.
Co-option.
Co-option, yeah, exactly. They found the same, like a baboon had a similar ERV that cats had. So you know what they said? Well, a cat must have eaten a baboon. There you go. There's how that goes. So, okay, so let's just say that that's true. So you're admitting now that we can get a virus from something that we eat, and now it shows up in the same place, and you're now going to say that, oh no, common ancestry is true because that evolved from the common ancestor. They just falsified themselves by saying that you can get ERVs in a similar spot by consuming something with that same virus. So they're admitting that the same virus that's in that same spot in the cat can be in the same spot in a baboon if the baboon eats it. So they falsified themselves.
You know, so many great points, and I'm reflecting on everything he said. There's one thing that I really want to address, because he did point to the genetic similarity between chimps and humans. And for the audience's sake, I want to point out that so-called similarity in terms of genetics with chimpanzees and humans, they usually point to 98% similarity. The fact is And to leave no stone unturned, the researchers, you can actually see this in the original paper itself related to this topic, okay? The researchers, instead of dealing with some of the more difficult questions regarding major portions of the chimp and the human genomes, what they decided to do, because it was too difficult, Matt, was exclude. Okay, so they excluded all the large mismatch sections, which is over 1 billion letters. And therefore, a letter by letter comparison of those remaining 2 billion letters, sure, that revealed roughly 98% similarity. So that means, yeah, we share 98% of our genetics with the chimps, only if we ignore 18% and 20% of ours. So it's only about 88%, maybe 89% when you include your copy number variations, your gaps, your mismatch sections. And that means it's roughly 400 million DNA differences that exist when you consider the entire genomes, which we should. I mean, are you really going to go in and assume universal common ancestry? Do you see? They assume the bigger picture. It's all circular. So when we include everything, we're about 88% similar. That's 400 roughly million DNA differences. There's a huge waiting time problem. Isn't that right, Matt? A massive, massive waiting time problem, because within that time frame since the split, they have to be able to fix that many DNA differences. But fixation rates are relatively small, or relatively, it takes a long time to fix those mutations. So there's a huge waiting time problem. They don't have any explanation for it. It's a huge problem, Matt.
Oh yeah, I know. That's why I don't think they've really investigated too much of the Mendel's accountant, because if they did, they would really question their own theory. You know, they would go back to the drawing board and have to really assess, like, wait a minute, if our model's based and driven off of mutations, and mutations are the entire cause of diversity, then what is the mutation load going on? What like, can mutations keep accumulating at their current rate? Are beneficial mutations occurring fast enough to account for the diversity of life, even in the evolutionary time frame? And it really just isn't there. So that's, I think, why a lot of people really need to learn what Mendel's accountant really is and investigate it, because it's a great piece of evidence that shows that their own model can't be true based on their own evidence that they've discovered in regards to mutation, which is the foundation of their entire model.
Right. It's I'm gonna share a screen real quick just to give some people a visual on this. Great. And right here. So to go through this, I've made some points here. And right here, there are entire gene families known in humans that are not found in chimpanzees. Conservatively, there are 35 million plus single letter differences that would have had to arise and then spread through the populations to the point of fixation. Fixation just means to get stuck in place. So since fixation rates are really slow, it becomes impossible to be able to fix those many differences. This occurring in only the few generations following the split. Now it gets even worse. In addition to the single letter differences, tens of thousands of chromosomal rearrangements had to occur, spread and become fixated as well. And on top of that, tens of millions of base pairs of insertions and deletions. And as I pointed out earlier, rates of fixation are extremely slow. Most new variants are lost. The rate of mutation and selection necessary for this amount of change in a mere 6 million years is staggering. Yet it necessarily occurred for evolution to be true, because they assume evolution. Don't question the bigger picture. Humans and chimps are related. They split from a common ancestor. Co-option's true. It's all a joke. You can find more of this in Evolution's Achilles Heels, which is a great book. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. I was just looking in the chat real quick. In his image asks if you know how to use Mendel's accountant. Yeah, because he's pointing out some tutorial videos would be helpful. Yeah, that would be awesome. So
you got to download the program first. You can't just like go on Mendel's accountant. You can go to NIH, and then the NIH website, the National Institute of Health, will take you to the Mendel's accountant website, and it's large, and you have to know exactly what you want to type in. So you first have to gather what you want to run. You got to go, okay, well, what's the foundation of the population you want to start with? Do you want to start with a creation, like 2 people, or do you want to start with the evolutionary model and say that we're going to go with just everything started as a larger population, right? A population size of 10,000. Then how long did that population of 10,000 live? Then you got to put that in. Then you got to put what was the population growth? Then you got to put in the mutations that you want. So you start out with, let's say, a minimal two mutation beneficial program. You put that in. How long is that going to take over until the mutations sweep through, selective sweep? How long until it reaches fixation? You're going to input all of this data. So you want to write all that down before you even download the program, because once you do, you're going to look at all those questions and be like, oh no, I got to start from scratch. Now I got to know what I want to input. So it's fun because you can run your evolutionary scenario, or you can run the creation scenario, both side by side. And get the outcomes. John Sanford, there'll be some good videos online of people that have actually ran it, so you can actually watch it. But I don't think any creationists have really done it except for John Sanford and his team. And you can go on to his website and see what they did and watch the charts, because they're really good at making charts and diagrams to show you a visual thing. Otherwise, you've got to just read the math, and the math, you've got to really like the math to enjoy that.
And One Punch Man says, I have a doubt. Does viruses that infect our non-germ cell lines, do they get passed on? Well, what I'll say is one of the most common retroviruses that people think of is the HIV retrovirus, right, Matt? And typically when we think of retroviruses, they are spreading from one person to another. Like HIV would be spread from one person to another, but they would not be inherited, this virus. And when it comes to the endogenous retroviruses, the retroviruses that actually remain inside the cells and passed on, if it's an infection through the germ cell line, would be passed on from generation to generation, essentially. So that's why when they look to the endogenous retroviruses, these retroviral-like sequences in the genome, they look at these pieces of DNA and they see that it's got the characteristics of a retrovirus. And so they conclude that these had to have originated from outside through ancient RNA invasions. But Matt, if we put all of this together, like you were pointing out with the HIV, where did the HIV virus originate from?
Monkeys, from
Right.
SIV.
So in its original created arena, would it have been essential and functional in that arena?
Yeah, whatever the SIV does inside the monkeys causes no detriment to them whatsoever. It has some beneficial function, for sure. And then, but some chimpanzee fought one, ate one, molested one, we don't know. It got the virus. It doesn't matter how it got it. And then the SIV mutated into HIV, became detrimental.
Right. Because through mutation accumulation, internal escapees, external escapees. They can go from good to bad. They can be harmful. In the original created arena, they would be beneficial. Now, there can be hot spots, like you were saying, Matt. If there is a viral infection in the germ cell line, then essentially they can be inherited. But natural selection, for example, there are mechanisms in the genomes that can recognize these types of foreign infections, and they would eliminate them. Or there's even something called apoptosis. But the main thing to consider is the fact that if millions of years of deep time evolution is true, then these ancient RNA invasions should essentially be eliminated, because they would just be junk, they would be useless, they would be a waste of energy and resources to the cell. So it all comes down to the bigger picture. Where did the viral-like sequences originate? Once you start with a perfect creation, perfect genomes, where you've got these variation-inducing genetic elements, viral-like sequences, viral-like elements, they're healthy, they're beneficial to the cell, beneficial to the organism. Over time, some crazy things can happen, right, Matt? Some of these viral elements can jump within the same genome. Some of these viral elements can jump between species. Mutations can take good viral-like sequences into something bad. There's a lot of things that can happen after that point. They originated within the host, but after that, there's a number of events that can take place, some good, some bad. Isn't that right, Matt?
Yeah, I think what happens is a lot of people view it from a perspective of just one side, just the evolutionary perspective. But if you think about it from a mutation rate perspective, rather than just a virus, we know that mutations get passed on more for males than they do for females, because through the germline on the male side, the mutations just keep accumulating and accumulating and accumulating, and they can't get weeded out. But with females, they go through more recombination. So recombination can save a mutation from not being seen. And so they don't really build up much. That's why it matters more on how old the father is based on their age of reproduction for passing on mutations to their child than it does from a female. Now, it doesn't matter from a virus perspective. A viral load can get passed on. It's just a matter of, like you said, whether or not selection can see it. Selection can't see most of the near neutral mutations that are being passed on by the male. It can only select some of the most deleterious ones. So only 2 to 3 in a lifetime harmful ones get passed on, and the vast majority, the 60, 70, or 80, they get weeded. They get passed on because they're not seen by selection whatsoever. So they keep compiling, just like these viruses, right? These beneficial things kept being bombarded by mutations until the point where they're supposed to be being passed on, and we see them being passed on, and they're being passed on over and over and over, and these beneficial viruses keep being hit by mutation and mutation and mutation until finally they don't really even serve much of a function anymore, but they're still being passed on because the body knows they were important, and that's why we see them there. And so when we look in the body and we're trying to look for harmful deleterious mutations, they're harder to see because sometimes selection does remove them. That's why we look to particular mutations when we want to go farther back in time, rather than just random deleterious mutations. We want to look at all mutations. We want to look at mutations that are in a population, right? How many became fixated? That's much more important than just looking for deleterious mutations, because some people inbreed more, therefore some of those might get weeded out. Some people diverge really quickly, so they don't have to worry about as many mutations. There's a whole bunch of different reasons, but viruses, coming from a created perspective, they should be passed on in the germline, and that is what we see. Also, I guess I could say that this was probably what confuses the evolutionist more. They look at the insertion part of the gene and the tail end of it. So they see a key and they see a lock, the tail end and the beginning end. And they go, well, because that exists, that just shows that, they're viruses. No, that just shows that they can move. They can move in our own genome, and they still provide a beneficial reaction because that's what they were designed to do. Just because they have a key and a lock and can move doesn't mean that that's their only purpose and that's what they were evolved to do. and jump around and just cause havoc everywhere that they go. That's the evolutionary model. That's death and decay. That's what springs forth life. Everything came from chaos and death, and life comes from more chaos and death and survival of the fittest. Our model is completely different. So,
right. It comes down to these genetic elements and the assumptions behind universal common ancestry, the assumptions behind the design hypothesis. And what we now know is that these genetic elements are not just functionless, vestigial remnants of our past. All of these various classes of retrotransposons turn out to be incredibly essential. They are functionally integrated into the genomes of living organisms, and they serve a number of amazing functions. The reasons why they persist is because they are useful. If they were useless, then they would have been eliminated by natural selection long ago. And I love how the evolutionists have these excuses. So the evolutionists believe that long ago and far away, non-living chemicals organized themselves into the first reproducing cell, and that first single-celled organism evolved into a multi-celled organism, which evolved into a fish, which evolved into an amphibian, a reptile, a mammal, right? Farm. Fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal, all of these large-scale changes, but because the evidence is against them when it comes to junk DNA, well, natural selection wasn't able to remove all of this useless junk. But selection and mutations and other types of evolutionary mechanisms took a single-celled like ancestor into a whale, but selection wasn't capable of removing all of this junk. No, that it wasn't able to do. They want their cake and they want to eat it too, and it's horrible for evolution. They're cornered. This video is irrefutable. They got nothing. It's sad. And it's a great time to be a young earth creationist, Matt. And I'm running out of fuel. I'm probably going to start slurring my words soon. This was good. This was technical. So this was a very technical rebuttal. Our goal was pretty much to make the most technical and informative rebuttal to ERVs that exists on the internet, that exists on YouTube. And I think it's pretty close to being the case. So it all comes down to the very beginning. Those couple questions, those important questions, the evolutionists are not doing anything to answer those key questions. We're making predictions, and we are excited about the future. We're excited about the future research when it comes to function, when it comes to health, because we are learning more every single day. And that's why we can sit here for 2 hours going over paper after paper that talks about the incredible functionality of these variation-inducing genetic elements. So any final words, brother?
Yes, something came to my mind.
Yeah, take your time.
This is that I want you to think about it from a different perspective too. For endogenous retroviruses, that is, I would go out on a limb and say we don't find any humans that are free of any human-only ERV, right? So why would that be? Let's just say that humans came out of a bottleneck 200,000 years ago, and we were the first humans, right? That came out. Let's just say a group of them are. So now none after that point ever obtained an ERV, right, up until now, because right, we all share them. You, me, doesn't matter where you live. We all have the same endogenous retroviruses, right? And they're telling us that humans got them after their split. So what they mean by that is Denisovan got one, and then thousands of years passed, and then Neanderthals came, and then they got some, and then eventually humans got some. Well, where is that? How come there are some humans that when you look inside of them, you don't find what they said? You find the same ERVs in them that you do in us and everyone else that you know. How come endogenous retroviruses aren't bombarding some people, and therefore some have ERVs that others don't have? It's because we're not seeing their story. Their storyboard is just made up. That's why. And I just thought about that. That's all.
No, that's really good, brother. You know, we like to leave no stone unturned. So if there's any thoughts, any points you want to make, we saw a comment from Simon Dan. So he knows that video exists. So we're hoping if there's a rebuttal, it's hopefully this time he can at least understand the argument and not make an entire video based on a misrepresentation and a straw man. No, this is, yeah, go ahead, brother.
I said I won't hold my breath on that from what I've seen from him.
Yeah. Yeah, neither will I. Neither will I. And I won't hold my breath either when it comes to stated clearly. Because, guys, check out about a year and a half ago. Like I said at the beginning, Matt and I pointed out, we went on Ken Hoven's channel. We debunked Pelagia on ERVs. Pelagia had no response. I've debated Conspiracy Cat specifically on that topic, our first debate. He had no answer. He had no answer to any of this. They've never presented a paper showing this imaginary co-option. It's sad. It's bad for the evolutionists. It's a bad time to be an evolutionist. Genetics is completely overturning universal common ancestry. It is confirming biblical creation and independent origins. So, guys, it's a great time to be a biblical creationist. And Andrew Kaufman says, thank you, guys. Amazing discussion. God bless you all. Well, God bless you as well, brother. God bless everybody in the chat. We've been going on 2.5 hours. We still got 35 people in the chat, which makes me always tempted to keep going more and more. And we've done 5-6 hour streams, but I think this is probably a good place to end it. I think we've touched on any of their possible arguments, and it's just not looking good for the evolutionists. Raymond, thank you so much for the super stickers. And apparently I'm saying creation corpse wrong. Matt, over in good old United States of America, how do you say corpse?
I thought the same. It sounds correct to me.
I'll look into the proper way of saying it, brother Raymond. Creation corpse. Yeah, we'll see. I hope I'm saying it at least somewhat correctly. Godzilla Freak says, stated clearly has abiogenesis videos too. Yeah, we've seen Raymond's laughing. I think we're both saying it wrong. And once again, for anybody here, that new Creation Corpse thumbnail, that is dedicated to Raymond. I'm going to go pull it up. There it is. There's the team. There's the team. Don't mess with the Creation Corpse. Team SFT. So anyways, new Patreon videos should be out tomorrow, guys. I'll leave a community post. Thanks so much for all the chat, or for all the super stickers. And just checking out the chat. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. And we'll see you Wednesday, right, Matt, for Dr. Dan Biddle from Genesis Apologetics for an exciting interview and discussion. I am pumped. One final super sticker, because Raymond wins the super sticker war again. Undefeated champ. Brother Andrew, Jungle Jargon, Alec, Godzilla Freak, thanks for sticking it out. I hope you enjoyed. If there's any questions anybody ever has, please let us know. Final words, Matt, man.
No, we got it, man. That was all good. So no questions, game. We're good.
I think. Well, I feel like we just finished a couple-hour workout. I'm pretty tired. I'm gonna go get some food. Maybe I'll make George Bond proud and I'll order a pizza. I'm just kidding. It's too late for that. So, all right. God bless all. Yeah. God bless all, and we'll see you Wednesday. SFT and Matt Man are out.